There is a peculiar kind of suffering that belongs exclusively to the human condition. Not the suffering of hunger or physical pain, but something far more insidious. It is the suffering of feeling incomplete, of wandering through life convinced that something essential is missing from within us. We chase careers, relationships, achievements, spiritual experiences, anything that might fill the hollow space we sense at our core. We accumulate titles, possessions, experiences, lovers, all in a desperate attempt to become whole. But what if this entire quest is built upon a fundamental misunderstanding? What if the very thing we seek has never been absent at all? In the 13th century, a mystic named Ibn Arabi articulated a vision so radical, so fundamentally challenging to our ordinary way of perceiving ourselves, that its implications are still rippling through human consciousness today. His central insight cuts through centuries of spiritual striving with a single devastating truth: you are already whole. The perfection you seek, the completeness you hunger for, the divine essence you think you must attain, it has been within you from the very beginning. You have never been separate from it, you have only forgotten. This is not a comforting platitude. This is not self-help philosophy wrapped in mystical language. This is a precise diagnosis of the human condition and a radical reimagining of what it means to be alive. Ibn Arabi's philosophy suggests that every moment of incompleteness you have ever felt, every spiritual practice you have undertaken, every teacher you have sought, every book you have devoured searching for answers, all of it has been motivated by an illusion. Not an illusion about the importance of growth or the value of seeking, but an illusion about what you fundamentally are. The question that haunts us then becomes not how to achieve wholeness, but how we came to forget it in the first place. And more urgently, how do we remember? To understand Ibn Arabi's vision, we must first understand his conception of reality itself. In his vast body of mystical writings, particularly in works like the Meccan Revelations and the Bezels of Wisdom, he articulates what scholars later termed Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of existence. This is not pantheism as Western philosophy might understand it, but something far more subtle and profound. According to Ibn Arabi, there is ultimately only one existence, one being, one reality. This reality is what he calls the real, or God. Everything that exists, every tree, every stone, every thought, every human being, every galaxy, every atom, exists only through this one existence. Nothing has being in and of itself. We are not separate entities existing alongside God. We are manifestations, self-disclosures, theophanies of the one divine reality expressing itself in infinite forms. Think of it this way. Imagine a mirror reflecting an object. The reflection exists, you can see it, you can describe it, but it has no reality independent of both the mirror and the object being reflected. In the same way, Ibn Arabi suggests, we exist as reflections of the divine names and attributes in the mirror of existence. Our reality is real, but it is not independently real. It is the reality of the real manifesting through the form that we call self. This is where Ibn Arabi's philosophy becomes psychologically profound. If we are manifestations of divine reality, then we contain within us all of the divine names and attributes. God created the human being, according to the sacred tradition Ibn Arabi quotes, in his form, or more specifically, in the form of the name Allah, which is the all-comprehensive name that encompasses all other divine names. The human being is thus a microcosm, a small universe that reflects the entire macrocosm. Every quality that exists in the vast cosmos exists potentially within the human soul. Mercy and severity, beauty and majesty, knowledge and mystery, power and gentleness, all of it is encoded in the depth of what you are. You are, in Ibn Arabi's language, the perfect human in potential, al-insan al-kamil. But here is the paradox that defines our existence. We are created perfect, yet we must realize that perfection. We are already whole, yet we experience ourselves as fragmented. We already contain all divine attributes, yet we live as if we are fundamentally lacking. How can this be? The answer lies in the nature of consciousness itself, in the strange phenomenon of self-awareness. To exist as a particular being, to be you rather than undifferentiated existence, requires a kind of forgetting. It requires the veiling of your essential nature. If you were constantly fully aware of your unity with divine reality, you could not experience yourself as a distinct individual. The very possibility of your personal existence depends upon a temporary obscuration of your fundamental wholeness. Ibn Arabi speaks of veils, veils of light and veils of darkness, that separate human consciousness from direct awareness of the real. But these veils are not obstacles placed in our way by some external force. They are necessary features of existence itself. They are how the infinite becomes finite, how the unlimited takes on particular form, how God knows himself through infinite manifestations. Your sense of incompleteness is not a flaw, it is a feature of being human, but it is a feature built upon a misunderstanding. You feel incomplete not because you lack something essential, but because you have forgotten what you essentially are. The spiritual path, then, is not about acquiring something new. It is about removing the obstacles to recognition. It is about remembering. This reframes everything. Your anxiety about not being enough? It comes from forgetting that you are a self-disclosure of infinite being. Your shame about your flaws and failures? It comes from comparing your limited self-concept to an imagined ideal, forgetting that your very limitations are part of how infinite possibility expresses itself in particular form. Your desperate seeking for meaning, purpose, love, accomplishment, all of it stems from the sense of lack created by the veiling of your essential wholeness. But Ibn Arabi is not suggesting that you simply adopt a new belief system, that you tell yourself, "I am whole," and expect that to solve everything. The recognition he speaks of is not intellectual. It is experiential. It is a transformation of consciousness so fundamental that it reorganizes your entire relationship to yourself and to reality. He calls this process of realization takhalluq bi asma Allah, becoming characterized by the divine names. This is not about imitating divine qualities from the outside, not about forcing yourself to be more patient or more loving or more wise. It is about recognizing and actualizing the divine names that are already inscribed in your essential nature. Each human being is a unique configuration of divine attributes. Some reflect divine mercy more strongly, others divine majesty. Some embody divine creativity, others divine order. The path to wholeness is not about becoming the same as everyone else. It is about becoming more fully yourself, which paradoxically means becoming more fully a transparent reflection of divine reality. This is why Ibn Arabi emphasizes the importance of self-knowledge. He who knows himself knows his Lord, the sacred tradition says. But self-knowledge in this context does not mean knowing your personality traits or your psychological patterns, though it includes that. It means knowing yourself in your depth, knowing yourself as you truly are beneath all the layers of identity, conditioning, and self-concept. It means recognizing that your truest self is not separate from divine reality. When Ibn Arabi describes his own mystical ascension, his spiritual journey through the cosmos and beyond, he concludes with startling words. In this journey, I gained the meanings of all the divine names. I saw that they all go back to one named object, one entity. That named object was what I was witnessing, and that entity was my own wujud. So my journey had been only in myself. Read that again. His entire cosmic journey was a journey into himself. The infinite reality he sought was his own existence, his own being properly understood. This is not solipsism. It is the recognition that the depth of the self and the depth of reality are not two different depths. But how do we actually engage in this process of remembering? How do we move from the intellectual understanding that we are whole to the lived experience of wholeness? Ibn Arabi's answer is nuanced and multi-layered. He does not offer a simple technique or a step-by-step formula. Instead, he describes multiple dimensions of practice that work together to polish the mirror of consciousness. First, there is the dimension of character transformation, akhlaq. This is not merely ethics in the conventional sense. It is the cultivation of qualities that align your outward behavior with your inward reality. When the Prophet Muhammad was described as having a magnificent character, his wife explained, his character was the Quran. He had become a living embodiment of divine speech, divine revelation. His inner and outer dimensions were in perfect harmony. For Ibn Arabi, this is not an unattainable ideal reserved for prophets. It is the human possibility, the birthright of every soul. The cultivation of character is not about suppressing your authentic nature to conform to external rules. It is about discovering which divine names are most strongly inscribed in your essential nature and learning to express them with clarity and balance. Second, there is the dimension of knowledge, but not knowledge in the abstract intellectual sense. Ibn Arabi distinguishes between knowledge gained through imitation of others and knowledge gained through direct realization. You can study theology, philosophy, mysticism for decades and still not know yourself. You can memorize all the divine names and never recognize them manifesting through your own existence. Real knowledge, Ibn Arabi insists, must be discovered within. It cannot simply be transmitted from teacher to student like information. This is why Ibn Arabi, despite his vast learning and his mastery of Islamic sciences, constantly points his readers back to their own inner experience. The three books he speaks of, the cosmic book of nature, the revealed book of scripture, and the inner book of the soul, must all be read together. Focusing only on external knowledge will never lead to realization. The signs in the horizons must be understood together with the signs within yourself. Third, there is the dimension of direct spiritual experience and practice. Ibn Arabi underwent periods of khalwa, spiritual retreat and seclusion throughout his life. But he understood this not as an escape from the world. How could one escape from what is ultimately a manifestation of divine reality, but as a temporary intensification of focus on the interior dimension of existence? In retreat, away from the constant demands and distractions of ordinary life, consciousness has the opportunity to perceive more subtle dimensions of reality, to receive direct self-disclosures of the real, to experience states of consciousness that reveal aspects of your being normally hidden by the noise of daily existence. These experiences serve as reminders, as openings, as glimpses of the wholeness that is always present but usually veiled. But perhaps the most important and most challenging dimension of the path Ibn Arabi describes is simply the sustained attention to reality as it is. Not reality as you wish it to be, not reality as your beliefs and concepts tell you it should be, but reality in its immediate present manifestation. This requires tremendous courage. To see reality clearly means seeing yourself clearly, and most of us are quite invested in not seeing ourselves too clearly. We prefer our self-concepts, our stories about who we are, to the more complex and often uncomfortable truth. We prefer the familiar suffering of feeling incomplete to the disorienting challenge of recognizing our wholeness. Because here is what makes Ibn Arabi's teaching so challenging. Recognizing your wholeness does not mean life becomes easy. It does not mean you transcend all difficulties, escape all suffering, rise above the human condition. The perfect human being in Ibn Arabi's vision is not someone who has left humanity behind, but someone who has become more fully human, more fully themselves, by recognizing their divine essence. The prophets and saints that Ibn Arabi points to as examples of human perfection did not live effortless lives. They struggled, they suffered, they faced immense challenges, but they met those challenges from a different ground of being. They did not experience their difficulties as threats to their fundamental wholeness, because they knew themselves as manifestations of infinite reality. Their sense of self was not limited to their personal ego, so the vicissitudes of personal existence could not ultimately threaten them. This is the profound psychological shift that comes with remembering your wholeness. It is not that problems disappear, but that your relationship to problems transforms. You stop experiencing life as something happening to a vulnerable, incomplete self that needs protection and enhancement. You begin to experience life as the self-disclosure of reality itself, of which you are an integral and necessary part. From this perspective, even difficulties and suffering can be recognized as part of the divine self-manifestation. This is not spiritual bypassing, not a way of dismissing real pain. It is a shift in the level at which you identify yourself. When you know yourself as a wave, storms are threatening. When you know yourself as the ocean, storms are just another form of your own movement. But we must be careful here. There is a trap that many people fall into when they encounter teachings like Ibn Arabi's. They hear you are already whole, and they use it as an excuse for complacency. They think, if I'm already perfect, why should I bother with practice, with growth, with effort? This is a fundamental misunderstanding. You are whole in your essence, in your fundamental nature, but that wholeness must be realized, actualized, manifested in the realm of your lived experience. Potential perfection and realized perfection are not the same thing. A seed contains the entire tree, potentially, but it must grow, must be nurtured, must go through a process of development to actualize that potential. Ibn Arabi uses the metaphor of the mirror. You are created as a perfect mirror for divine self-disclosure. But mirrors become tarnished, covered in dust, obscured by neglect. The mirror's essential nature as a reflective surface does not change, but its ability to function as a mirror is compromised. Spiritual practice is the polishing of the mirror. And this polishing is not something you do once and complete. It is the ongoing work of a lifetime. Each moment of self-awareness, each act of character cultivation, each experience of presence, each sincere seeking, all of it contributes to the clarification of consciousness, to the removal of veils, to the remembering of what you truly are. There is something deeply paradoxical about this process. You are seeking what you already have. You are becoming what you already are. You are remembering what you have never actually forgotten, because your essence has never been lost, only veiled from your conscious awareness. The spiritual path is simultaneously essential and unnecessary, urgent and already accomplished. Living with this paradox, holding both truths simultaneously, is part of what Ibn Arabi means by comprehensive knowledge. It is not either or. You are not either perfect or imperfect. You are perfect in essence and imperfect in manifestation, complete in depth and incomplete in surface, whole in your fundamental nature and fragmented in your conscious experience. And all of these seeming contradictions resolve in a higher understanding that embraces both poles. This is why Ibn Arabi's teaching resists simple categorization. Is it monism or dualism? Is it about transcendence or immanence? Is the self identical with God or distinct from God? Ibn Arabi's answer to all of these questions is essentially yes and no. The reality is more subtle, more paradoxical, more alive than these either-or categories can capture. God is both transcendent and immanent. The self is both identical with divine reality in essence and distinct in form. You are both already enlightened and needing to realize enlightenment. These are not contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be lived. And perhaps this is the deepest teaching, that reality itself, at its most fundamental level, is paradoxical. It cannot be captured in concepts, cannot be reduced to clear, non-contradictory propositions. It can only be experienced, witnessed, lived. This is why Ibn Arabi, for all his voluminous writings, ultimately points beyond words to direct experience. When you have truly remembered your wholeness, you do not need to talk about it constantly. You do not need to convince others or defend your realization. It becomes simply how you are, how you move through the world. Others may sense it in you, a certain quality of presence, a depth of being, a lack of fundamental anxiety. But you yourself are not concerned with being perceived as enlightened or realized. You are simply being what you are, no longer trying to be something else. This brings us to perhaps the most practical implication of Ibn Arabi's teaching. If you are already whole, what does that mean for how you live your daily life? Does it mean abandoning your responsibilities, giving up your goals, dropping all effort? Quite the opposite. When you recognize your wholeness, your actions become more authentic, more aligned with your true nature. You are no longer driven by the compulsive need to prove yourself, to achieve in order to finally be enough, to accumulate in order to fill an inner void. Your actions arise from fullness rather than lack. You may still have goals, still pursue achievements, still want to grow and develop, but the quality of that wanting changes. It is no longer desperate. It is no longer driven by a sense that your worth depends on these outcomes. You can engage fully with the process of becoming without being attached to specific results, because your fundamental okayness is not at stake. Relationships transform as well. When you no longer need others to complete you, to validate you, to prove your worth, you can meet them more genuinely. You can see them more clearly because you are not looking at them through the filter of your needs and demands. Paradoxically, by needing others less, you can love them more fully. Your relationship with your own mind and emotions also shifts. You stop identifying so completely with every thought and feeling that passes through consciousness. You recognize thoughts and emotions as movements within the vast space of awareness that you are, not as definitions of your identity. When anger arises, you are the space in which anger appears, not simply an angry person. When anxiety appears, you are the awareness that knows anxiety, not just an anxious self. This does not mean you become detached or emotionally flat. Ibn Arabi himself was known for his passionate engagement with life, his poetry of mystical love, his profound emotional expressiveness. But his emotions arose within the context of wholeness rather than lack. They were the play of divine attributes manifesting through a particular human form, not symptoms of a self trying to survive and protect itself. There is also a profound ethical dimension to remembering your wholeness. If you recognize yourself as a manifestation of divine reality, you must also recognize others the same way. Every human being you encounter is a unique self-disclosure of the real, a particular configuration of divine names, another mirror reflecting the infinite. This realization makes cruelty and exploitation impossible at a fundamental level. How can you harm what is essentially yourself? How can you exploit another manifestation of the same reality that you are? The recognition of unity does not erase distinctions between people, but it places those distinctions within a larger context of fundamental interconnection. Ibn Arabi's vision thus offers a foundation for ethics that is not based on external commandments or social contracts, but on the direct recognition of reality. You treat others with respect, kindness, and justice, not because you are commanded to, not because society expects it, but because you recognize in others the same divine reality that you recognize in yourself. Ethics becomes not a burden, but a natural expression of clear seeing. But what about when you forget? Because you will forget. Even those who have had profound experiences of unity, glimpses of their essential wholeness, inevitably return to ordinary consciousness, where the sense of separation reasserts itself. What then? Ibn Arabi would say that the forgetting itself is part of the path. Each time you forget and then remember again, the remembering goes deeper. Each time you lose yourself in identification with the limited ego and then recognize your larger nature, the recognition becomes more stable. The spiritual path is not a straight line of constant progress. It is a spiral, revisiting the same territory at ever deeper levels. And perhaps the forgetting serves a purpose. If you were constantly, unwaveringly aware of your unity with infinite being, how would you function in the world? How would you make decisions, form relationships, pursue goals? The oscillation between remembering and forgetting, between identification and recognition, between contraction and expansion, this itself may be the human condition, not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be accepted. The practice then is not to reach some final state of permanent enlightenment where you never forget again. The practice is to remember more quickly, to recover your ground more easily, to suffer less intensely during the periods of forgetting. It is to gradually extend the moments of recognition until they color even the times when you have lost touch with your depth. There is something liberating about this perspective. You do not have to be perfect in your practice. You do not have to maintain constant awareness. You do not have to never have a negative thought or difficult emotion. You can be fully human, forgetful, imperfect, struggling, while still holding the truth of your essential wholeness. Ibn Arabi himself lived this reality. He was a man of his time, embedded in a particular culture and religious tradition, facing practical challenges and personal difficulties. He was not a disembodied, enlightened being floating above human concerns. He was a human being who had deeply realized his divine nature while remaining fully human. This is the model of perfection he offers. Not transcendence of humanity, but fulfillment of humanity. Not escape from the limitations of embodied existence, but acceptance of those limitations as the very form through which infinite being manifests. Not rejection of the personal self, but understanding of that self in its proper context, as a temporary, particular expression of eternal, universal reality. So what would your life look like if you truly remembered you are whole, not as a belief you hold, but as a lived reality you embody? Perhaps it would look surprisingly ordinary from the outside. You would still have responsibilities, challenges, relationships. You would still experience the full range of human emotions. You would still grow, learn, change. But inwardly everything would be different. There would be a fundamental relaxation, a letting go of the constant vigilance required to protect and enhance a vulnerable self. There would be a spaciousness in consciousness, room for all experiences, without the need to cling to pleasant ones or reject difficult ones. There would be a sense of being at home in reality, because you would recognize reality as your own deeper nature manifesting. You would still care about things, still want certain outcomes, still work toward goals, but underneath all of that activity would be an unshakable okayness that does not depend on any particular outcome. You would be playing the game of life fully engaged, but no longer confused about it being just a game, no longer believing your ultimate worth and being are at stake in the results. This is not nihilism. It is not a retreat into detachment or indifference. It is actually the condition for genuine engagement. When you are not constantly worried about whether you are enough, you have energy available for real presence, real connection, real creativity. When you know yourself as whole, you can give yourself fully to each moment without holding back out of fear of depletion. There is a joy that comes with this recognition, but it is not the excited happiness of getting what you want. It is deeper, quieter, the joy of being itself, the inherent delight of existence recognized in its true nature. Ibn Arabi's poetry speaks of this joy, this divine love affair in which God loves himself through loving his creatures, and creatures love God through loving existence in all its forms. You are caught up in this love affair whether you know it or not. Your deepest longing, your most fundamental desire, is the longing of the divine to know itself, expressed through the particular form that you are. Every time you seek beauty, truth, love, meaning, you are participating in God's longing to be known. And every time you find even a glimpse of those qualities, you are experiencing divine self-recognition manifesting through human consciousness. The spiritual path, from this perspective, is not about you as a separate individual trying to reach God, as a separate entity. It is about God knowing himself through your consciousness, awakening to its source. You are not separate from the process. You are the process. Your seeking is divine seeking. Your recognition is divine recognition. This is why Ibn Arabi says the path is circular. You begin with God. You are never separate from God. And you return to conscious recognition of what has always been true. The journey is real. The transformation is real. The realization is real. But it is all happening within divine reality, to divine reality, for divine self-knowledge. And you, in your particular precious unique form, are an irreplaceable part of this cosmic process. Without you, without your specific perspective, something of divine self-knowledge would be missing. God needs you to be exactly who you are, with all your apparent flaws and limitations, because you reflect a unique combination of divine attributes that can only be manifested through this particular form that is your life. So the teaching, "You are already whole, you just forgot it," is not asking you to become someone different. It is inviting you to recognize who you already are, beneath all the layers of conditioning, beneath all your self-concepts, beneath even your most cherished spiritual ideas about yourself. It is inviting you to rest in your own being, to trust your own existence, to recognize the divine signature written in your soul. The question is not whether you can become whole. You cannot become what you already are. The question is whether you are willing to remember, whether you are willing to remove the veils, whether you are willing to see yourself as you truly are, rather than as you have been taught to see yourself. This requires courage. It requires a willingness to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. It requires tolerance for the disorientation that comes when your familiar self-image begins to dissolve. It requires patience with a process that unfolds according to its own timing, not according to your ego's agenda. But the reward is nothing less than freedom. Not freedom from your life circumstances, not freedom from challenges and difficulties, but freedom within whatever circumstances arise. Freedom to be fully yourself without apology or self-betrayal. Freedom to engage completely with life without losing yourself in the process. Freedom to love without possessiveness, to act without compulsiveness, to be without pretense. Ibn Arabi's teaching offers a vision of human possibility that is both utterly attainable and seemingly impossible. Attainable because it requires no acquisition of what you do not already have, no achievement of what you are not already in essence. Impossible because it requires seeing through the most convincing illusion, the illusion of being a separate, limited, incomplete self. But illusions, however convincing, remain illusions. The truth of your wholeness is not something that can be destroyed by your forgetting. It waits patiently beneath every moment of separation, every experience of lack, every desperate seeking. It is the ground you stand on while looking everywhere for ground. It is the awareness in which every thought of unworthiness appears. It is what you are while you search for what you might become. You are reading these words right now. Something in you is aware of these words, understands these concepts, resonates or resists with these ideas. What is that something? Who or what is it that is aware? When you turn your attention back toward the source of awareness itself, what do you find? Not a thing, not an object, not a limited entity. You find awareness itself, consciousness itself, being itself, vast, spacious, unlimited. And this awareness is not separate from divine reality. It is divine reality manifesting as your particular perspective. You are the universe becoming aware of itself through human form. This is not metaphor, this is not poetry, though it can only be pointed to poetically. This is the literal truth of what you are, obscured by habits of thought and language that constantly reinforce the illusion of being a separate, isolated, fundamentally lacking self. The remembering Ibn Arabi speaks of is not a remembering of information. It is a remembering of being, a return to your own source, a recognition of what has never actually been absent. And this remembering changes everything while changing nothing. The world remains the same. Your circumstances remain the same. Your personality, your history, your challenges all remain, but you are no longer lost in them. You know yourself as the space in which all of it appears, the awareness that contains all experience, the being that exists prior to and beyond all particular manifestations. And from that ground, you can finally live, not driven by compulsion, not motivated by lack, not seeking to become what you imagine you should be, just living moment by moment as what you are, a unique, precious, unrepeatable self-disclosure of infinite reality, already whole, always whole, never actually incomplete, though often forgetting. The path is remembering. The destination is where you already are. The journey is circular, returning always to its source. And you are what is journeying, what is being journeyed through, and what is ultimately found. The seeker, the seeking, and the sought are all one movement of divine reality knowing itself. You are already whole. You just forgot. And now, perhaps, you are beginning to remember.